Keir Starmer's speech yesterday was this, and I'm just going to play a clip of the most egregious section because it's worthy of illustrating what he does mention versus what he doesn't mention, and it shows exactly where the friend-enemy distinction is being drawn by the present, very clumsy Labour state.
But as well as the things that we've discovered, we've also seen shocking scenes across the nation. A mindless minority of thugs who thought that they could get away with causing chaos, smashing up communities and terrifying minorities, vandalising and destroying people's property, even trying to set fire to a building with human beings inside it. And as if that wasn't despicable enough, people displaying swastika tattoos, shouting racist slurs on our streets, Nazi salutes at the cenotaph, the very place we honour those who gave their lives for this country, desecrating their memory under the pretence, and it is a pretence, of legitimate protest. Now they're learning that crime has consequences, that I won't tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances, and I will not listen to those who exploit grieving families and disrespect local communities. But these riots didn't happen in a vacuum. They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society, the cracks in our foundations laid bare, weakened by a decade of division and decline, infected by a spiral of populism which fed off cycles of failure of the last government. Every time they faced a difficult problem, they failed to be honest. They offered the snake oil of populism, which led to more failure.
Oh, thank you. He's so boring. He's so boring.
I apologise. He's hardly a statesman who has a graft of speechcraft when he has to keep looking down at his notes every few seconds.
Well, that could be a Blair thing of you look down at your notes when you are reading out the parts that you don't want the press to crop because
He doesn't want them to crop anything from this speech because he's always looking at his notes then.
I think that, frankly, like Cole has said many times, he's just not that bright. He's both a demented ideologue and fundamentally unintelligent, so it makes him inflexible in adjusting the narrative, but also it just means he's not very dynamic on his feet. I mean, did you, either of you, watch any of the debates on the run-up to the general election? Or did you have better things to do?
I watched some of them, yeah.
So, you know when, I think it was Sky News, when he repeated the toolmaker line and someone in the crowd laughed, and they just saw the flash of anger? Whenever Rishi Sunak decided to find his spine lodged at the back of the CCHQ cupboard, and he said, well, here's what you're going to do. Are you going to return them to Afghanistan? That's ridiculous. And Starmer just got very angry and just sort of stood on the spot, not sure what to say. I think that his thoughts don't join up very well. He's not a very dynamic speaker, and that's why he keeps having to look down there.
Well, that's why as a prosecutor, it's very procedural. It's not very dynamic at all, really. And in fact, I don't know whether you're going to talk about some of the things he said, because it's very interesting and sort of naked in how he was saying it, talking about populism with animosity, as if to say, well, we're not popular, obviously, so it's very interesting, isn't it, that he just came out and said it, because you'd think that it would look bad because it's basically the word popular embedded in it, and even if you're not a populist, saying you're against populism is still sort of bad optics.
Well, there's two reasons for that, and that's the first bit I wanted to focus on. It's this sort of demonising of populism and what it betrays about the ideology of the current Labour-occupied managerial state. I'm going to go to the sort of institutional defence of this first, and I am going to subject you to probably the least impressive media talking head at the moment, which is James O'Brien.
Oh, no.
This is what the regime's version of defence for Keir Starmer is. It's very short.
That was a boring speech by a boring man dealing with the boring business of getting Britain back on its feet. And if you don't like that, you don't like Britain. If you don't want him to succeed, you don't want Britain to succeed. You can't possibly argue with the diagnosis of a country on its knees. You can argue with the prescription, such that he has provided, and we'll have to wait until the budget to find out more, but you cannot argue with the diagnosis of a country on its knees unless you are truly deluded or incredibly wealthy.
I can actually argue with the diagnosis that limitless numbers of demographic change is not behind any of the economic or cultural problems in the country right now, James. I can argue with that because I'm seeing that firsthand for myself, and also I'm not going to write off all of my fellow countrymen as Nazis, which Starmer decided to do. As far as I'm aware as well, I think one of you two covered this. That whole swastika salute, Nazi.
I've seen no visual evidence of such a thing.
There were about 3 images that were sort of thrown together, but some of them, I think one person was pointing to their friend. I was going to imitate what they were doing, and then I realised how that's going to look.
Unwise.
They pulled the David Bowie on the guy, didn't they?
And you know, there were other people, it was perhaps someone waving, and it was just action shots of people doing stuff. And if you have a crowd of people do lots of different things.
Where was the swastika tattoo?
There was a former skinhead from the 1980s, basically an old man at this point, who had a tattoo like that. But it was also the British flag crossed with that flag. And it seemed like it could well have been, I don't know why he got it, but it could well have been
tattoo.
Sort of memorial for World War II or something like that.
Or even, he might have well just been in a prison gang.
Yeah.
Also, that's not what you go to prison for. That's not what you condemn the nation for. James O'Brien, obviously, scumbag, gremlin, awful person. I hate this characterization of Britain as a boring place where boring things happen. There has been no point outside of what the media has wanted you to believe about the Blair years where Britain has been anything other than an exciting and dynamic place to be, whether or not it's been a period of peace or war. The British have always been, as much as we are settled, fundamentally creative and restless people. We went out and conquered most of the world, for God's sake.
And improved it.
Yes, and improved it. We're not a boring nation of boring people and boring food. We're an exciting nation that gave most of the world's civilization for the first time ever.
The mistaking, well, James O'Brien is mistaking, deliberately or otherwise, being peaceful and civil with being boring, when actually they're very interesting, I would like to think. And it's more that we can just live in a civilization, and those sleepy suburbs, the quiet villages where nothing bad ever happens, that's good, not bad, James.
Well, it used to be that nothing bad ever happened there, and then
that's true.
Imported a less peaceful, less civilized diaspora that seemed to be very fond of stabbings recently. Before we...
Well, that's exciting, isn't it? Daily murders, daily stabbings, that's exciting. We're finally a dynamic nation.
It's Londoner Cope, isn't it? Just...
Well, yeah.
Yes, all these stabbings, it's very exciting.
James O'Brien is, at the end of the day, fundamentally a boring person who has boring thoughts in his boring head, and he writes boring books about boring left-wing fantasies like Rupert Murdoch controls England and has destroyed this country with right-wing populism. Yes, James, I've seen your new book, I've flipped through it, and it's the exact same bollocks talking points I see you and all of your mates saying over and over and over again. Change the bloody script, mate.
It's not just Londoner Cope, it's because most of the people that I know that are native Londoners, me included, cannot wait to leave, get away, and barely want to travel through it anymore. And I think we will get onto the sort of boring repetition, the idea that Starmer is just a plodding statesman doing the right thing and doing the tough things in a moment. I would like to point out to Starmer and the like, if you're counting the number of swastika tattoos and Roman salutes present at the recent Southport unrest, you've got precisely 1 and not even 1 compared to all of the Palestine protests that you actively agitated for because they were committed by your clientele voter base every weekend and Wednesday ever since October the 7th, where they had multiple depictions of the paragliders, or multiple swastikas, or they did actually deface and jump upon war memorials disrespecting the war dead, unlike the cenotaph. But, on the topic of populism, you're absolutely right. This is what I wanted to focus on. The two things here. What wasn't said, and the sort of demonization of populism. The reason is, this is 2 recommended readings by articles by Doug Stokes and Jake Scott, both former guests on the Lotus Eaters, in The Critic. But I found it very interesting as to the 2 visions of democracy that are being displayed here. The vision of democracy by Labour is essentially like Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, the book that inspired 1984, whereas every year, or every 5 years, the vote is a ritual exercise in choosing the same outcome. Because if they believe that fundamentally everyone is the same, they just live in a poor, deprived community without any youth clubs, and so they haven't realised that they're exactly the same and as British as you and me yet. Democracy is an exercise in picking the exact same outcome every time that you pull that lever or tick the box in the ballot box. And so populism is an interruption in everyone realizing that they're fundamentally exactly the same and they agree on these non-political topics. And so populism is the impediment to everyone realizing they're free and equal. Whereas for populists, what they would say is, we're the ultimate expression of democracy because we are popular. And instead of allowing these topics to go into the realm of neutrality and just be managed by the state, we're putting them back in public discourse again, with the belief that the more conversations you have about it, the more public awareness you have about it, the more change you can enact.
Simplified, populism is like that scene in Monty Python's Life of Brian, right? When he's speaking to everybody and he says, "You're all individuals," and they all go, "Yes, we're all individuals," and the one guy goes, "I'm not," and they go, "Shut up." That's the populist in the crowd. In this idea of democracy, that's the one guy.
Yes, and this is exactly why Starmer is trying to call it a poison, because he's trying to say that anyone that is saying things like immigration are within the remit of public debate and are not just settled science that importing infinity Deliveroo drivers in as an axiomatic good for the economy is preventing the egalitarian, very prosperous utopia from being carried out, and therefore they're snake oil salesmen. They're who's at fault, rather than the people that have mismanaged the economy, mismanaged the state, mismanaged the culture for a very, very long time. And then the other thing that he didn't mention was the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, Carl covered some of this stuff yesterday, but I wanted to drill down onto the rhetoric of the Metropolitan Police here. So as we know, they said it was 230 arrests, 49 arrests for possession of offensive weapon, at least 5 stabbings, 3 firearms were recovered, there was an acid attack, there were 37 assaults on an emergency worker. That doesn't just mean the police, by the way. That means they were attacking the ambulance staff that were trying to save people who have been stabbed. Lots of sexual offences, as you'll see with all the twerking videos. But the more interesting part was higher up.
Have we got the regime defence?
The regime defence as in, what, the articles?
No, let me find it. You carry on.
Okay, well, this was the most interesting post I found. This was from the Family Friendly Day. This was before all of the stats that I just read out had been stated. And they say, the Met Police, "We are tired of saying the same words every year. We are tired of telling families that their loved ones are seriously injured or worse. We are tired of seeing crime scenes at Carnival. Carnival is a community event and the vast majority of people come to celebrate, to dance, to enjoy music, and have a fantastic experience." Rhetoric like this would not be used about any of the events we see on St. George's Day, where they're not even protesters or demonstrators. Revellers were kettled in by police horses and had the batons cracked out and smacked over their head. And we wouldn't see this, as Starmer has just rallied off, a defence of any of the sentiments around the protests that erupted after the atrocities in Southport, because he literally says, and I'll quote directly here, "This is under the pretense," and it is a pretense of legitimate protest. So there is no legitimacy to concerns around the privileging of Islam, or the sheer number of illegal migrants, or the sheer number of legal migrants, that undergirded the protests that erupted in the aftermath of Southport. But an event which reliably results in stabbings and acid attacks and sexual assaults, this is just a small minority of people ruining the jerk chicken and the dancing for the rest of us.
To clarify, you can confirm if this is correct, Connor. My understanding of the carnival, from what I've seen over the past few years, is that it's essentially the event where London empties its ghettos of the estate gangs and lets them roam the streets elsewhere for a few days, and kind of crosses its fingers and says, right, don't murder too many of yourselves now. And then, there you go.
I travelled into London on Sunday and I actively avoided trains that went through New Cross and Lewisham, because I knew that there would be a diaspora of diversity that would be going towards the Paddington Way to then carry machetes, possibly rob people, possibly rape people, and use people's downstairs flats as their toilet.
Also, I found what I was looking for. This was actually in response to one of your tweets about it.
Oh, right.
It was by a @G_Gosden, Simon Gosden.
Oh, I was arguing with him yesterday.
Follow back pro-European, obviously.
The bot account.
Yep. That Notting Hill Carnival versus #Farage riots. Stores looted. 0. Bricks, chairs thrown at police. 0. Places of worship set on fire. 0. Hotels burnt. 0. Police cars set on fire. 0. Wheelie bins set on fire. 0. Police motorcyclists attacked. 0. Now, I don't believe that most of that is entirely accurate.
No, because you've had 37 assaults on emergency workers. I mean, last year, 6 police officers were bitten. Like, precisely, no police officers.
Zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. No police officers were bitten at any of the protests after Southport. There were stupid offences. Don't loot a Lush and a Greggs. Don't set fire to a hotel. We've all said
Listen,
that.
They may have bit them, but did they throw bricks or, God forbid, chairs at the police? No, I don't think they did. Maybe they did, actually.
Notting Hill Carnival is announced in advance and gives the residents time to prepare, which is why they boarded up.
Time to barricade
That's
themselves.
what happened.
Yeah.
They boarded up everything.
That's what I mean. It's them giving the gangs of London an opportunity to roam the streets freely outside of the estates that they normally keep all of their murder and stabbings to.
And a great example of that is actually the 2011 riots. And I think this proves a very good comparison to how Keir Starmer treated that versus how he has treated the recent civil unrest in the aftermath of Southport. He himself brings it up in his speech. He went on to say, I saw in the beginning of that downward spiral firsthand in 2011 when riots ripped through London and across the country. I was then Director of Public Prosecutions, and I think back to that time, I see just how far we have fallen. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Douglas Murray has done a great article in The Spectator saying about the unfashionable truth about the riots. Because in the aftermath of 2011, the fashionable excuse was that the 2008 crash and 2011 austerity was to blame for why all of these council estate gangs decided to go and smash up a JD Sports and nick bags of basmati rice. Murray does note that in the areas that saw 2011 London rioting, initially it was in London, my areas of London, weirdly, after noted drug runner and firearms offender Mark Duggan was shot by the police because he had a handgun on him. His son's just been done for handgun offences as well. Funny that, isn't it?
Racism of the highest kind.
Absolutely. After that happened, there were multiple riots across the country because people realised, oh, the police aren't actually cracking down on this as hard as they should do. Murray notes that back in 2011, in these sorts of areas, the proportion of out-of-work benefits in places like Sunderland was 18%. Today it's 19%. The unemployment figure in Rotherham was 16%. Today it's 18%. In Hartlepool, 21%. Today, 23%. So about a quarter of the people in those areas are out of work. Unrest was seen in the big towns and cities in 2011. Now unrest is seen in Labour constituencies, like those places, this year because of mass immigration. And part of the reason is all of the economic prosperity across the country, including in those locations, since 2011, so that's 3.6 million jobs, 74% of that was down to immigrant workers. So if you're going to blame all the 2011 London riots on economic hardship, and Keir Starmer saying the entire last government left a massive fiscal black hole, and that things like BLM or the 2011 London riots had an understandable motivation, even though criminal activity ruined it for the vast majority of people, whereas the current protests don't have any legitimate grounds, then it's actually not just economic mismanagement that's at fault here. It's not just the last government. It's immigration policy, which were the grounds that the Southport protests were enacted upon. And so, utterly ridiculous, and it's going to continue to get worse. And the reason it's going to continue to get worse is because this is not about policy. It's not about populism. It's about a pathological, a priori hatred of the English working class. And Starmer actually admits that this is going to get worse. And you would not hear Blair make these points. I'm just going to play this.
That's what we've inherited. Not just an economic black hole, a societal black hole. And that's why we have to take action and do things differently. And part of that is being honest with people about the choices that we face, how tough this will be. And frankly, things will get worse before they get better. I didn't want to release prisoners early. I was chief prosecutor for 5 years. It goes against the grain of everything I've ever done. But to be blunt, if we hadn't taken that difficult decision immediately, we wouldn't have been able to respond to the riots as we did. And if we don't take tough action across the board, we won't be able to fix the foundations of the country as we need.
So he's not only positioning himself as the anti-Blair, saying things can only get worse, he's also explicitly stating, yes, I stopped sex offenders going to prison, yes, I let out accomplices to murder like Lawson Natty, specifically to lock up grannies that made faces.
There's also a bit of misinformation here from Starmer, in that the prisons have been just as overcrowded for the past 10 years. There's no sudden overcrowding crisis. It's been that way. So this is a policy choice. You know, it's been this way for such a long time now, and all of a sudden it's a problem.
What's the cause of the overcrowding? It can't be anything to do with the fact that 27% of the prison population is from minority ethnic backgrounds.
Well, it's not just that. It's we are now number 1 in Western Europe and number 2 in all of Europe for crimes committed by foreign actors. So we have people in this country that it was a deliberate government policy to bring in who committed crimes and now stay here despite having the ability to deport them. So that's a decision to keep them in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, he's allowing violent criminals out on the streets or to just avoid jail time entirely to lock people up for Facebook posts, for attending these protests, even if they weren't necessarily violent, because it cuts against his political agenda. And the political agenda, and I'll sort of finish on this little bit here, because some of the stunning things that have been said in the last few days in response to these riots really warrant coverage. I did this write-up in The Critic. Basically, the reason they use the word far-right, and they don't use the word Nazi, and they don't use the word fascist, is because far-right is a substitute word for Nazi. But what they actually mean is the indigenous peoples of the British Isles who refuse to have their particular identity liquidated in multicultural liberalism, while every other identity and imported foreign diaspora gets given community status. Because when they mean community, just like when they mean diversity, they mean non-white ethnic group.
They mean colony.
Yes, when they say community, they mean colony. Exactly. That's what you need to interpret, because they always do the semantic smuggling to try and gaslight you. And in the aftermath of this, and the reason I wrote this is because there has been an insidious trend of people trying to gaslight the English out of believing that they exist, that they have an entitlement to their own country, they have a particular history that's worthy celebrating, and therefore it dismantles their ability to argue against an unlimited number of new foreign arrivals who are just as British as you and me. And some of these examples include people within the Labour Party with high and significant pull. For example, towering intellect David Lammy says, if anyone needs to integrate, it's the far right. So you need to integrate into your own country. Apparently, David Lammy now lays claim to what an English identity is, and he says, the rioters have forgotten that tolerance is one of the key values to being British.
No, it's not. That's a lie.
Yes.
What, the country that used to hang 1 in every 100 men is a tolerant country, is it?
We literally set up Australia as a penal colony.
Yep.
Not that tolerant, is it?
Now we give paedophiles suspended sentences.
Yeah, quite.
Where's tolerance got us?
Before you carry on, I'm going to set out a challenge. Somebody out there, you need to produce a remix of Things Can Only Get Better using Keir Starmer's new, catchier, modern and forward-looking phraseology.
I'm surprised someone didn't do Things Can Only Get Wetter when Rishi Sunak announced the general election with pouring rain.
Oh.
There you go. So Lammy actually brings up the 2011 London riots, and I thought this is a useful article to use in contrast to the other ones, because he actually turns around and says there were legitimate grievances there. Isn't that funny? So 2011 London riots, where people were severely injured, I think people were killed, buildings were arson attacked, there was lots of looting. It was actually terrifying for me, living a couple of roads away as a kid. That's all fine and dandy, but a few people get upset because of a Rwandan migrant, or son of a Rwandan migrants, allegedly, we have to say that, murdered 3 girls and stabbed more in Southport. No, that's completely beyond the pale. So Lammy says, it's right to draw parallels, but we must not equate the two moments. The riots that started in my constituency, Tottenham, were in response to the death of Mark Duggan following police contact. What followed across the country was opportunistic and criminal, with people joining in along the way, but unlike the disorder we're witnessing today, it was not encouraged and escalated by followers of a hateful, far-right ideology that is forcing minorities to live in fear. The far right has shown it has forgotten this need to integrate into their own country. It has forgotten about what it means to be English. The North Star of our values is tolerance, and our beautiful country is held together by a constellation of values that it has rejected. Respect for your neighbours, private property, respect for the police. Those swept up in the disorder need to integrate back into Britishness and out of this loathsome trending online hate.
Actually, one of the foundational principles of being British is justice, and we haven't had that in a long time, and it would be nice to bring that back, actually. Yeah.
But sorry, lads, we talked past the sale here. British is not a values-based identity. It's an ethnic identity.
It is, yeah.
King John was British. We had to draft Magna Carta to constrain him from not acting like an Englishman, but he's still an Englishman. He cannot be defined out of being English. And David Lammy may well be born in Britain. It doesn't make him more ethnically English than the people that are here. So to tell people to integrate into their own country that their ancestors and grandparents have lived in for a long time and decided to build is profoundly patronising, and they're trying to refashion British identity to be a set of values, like America, that they can define, rather than say, oh, the indigenous population here might have a claim to their homeland and they might be a bit upset that we're flooding them with hostile new arrivals.
Well, the homeland defines the character of the people that inhabit it. And, you know, my ancestors have lived in the British Isles for at least thousands of years. So the culture and the land itself sort of become one together because we shape the land and the land shapes us. You can't replace the people that live in that land.
But Josh, did you know that didn't even exist, according to Trevor Phillips?
Oh, get lost.
Rioters long for a Britain that has never existed.
It existed within my living memory, mate.
No, hang on.
Could you just... George Washington writes the article, Indians long for an America that never existed. Can you imagine it?
Well, they do treat the Windrush like our Mayflower.
Well, I think with the riots, it's easiest to sum up that the attitudes that propels this I've never seen put more plainly than last night. I finished a book about the Stonewall riots, which are, of course, part of the major canon of the civil rights movement of the 60s as presented to us by an author called David Carter. In the conclusion, he says, well, of course, I would never support political violence or violence used to enact political means, except in extreme, exceptional circumstances, such as those like the Stonewall riots, when it was an oppressed peoples pushing back against their oppressors. That's what it always comes down to, especially with leftists, which is it's okay when it relates to me and my people and my interests. That's when it's okay to fight. That's the message that people have been given. And of course, it's not in Trevor Phillips' interest, nor is it in David Lammy's interest for the indigenous, white, British people to push back and reassert their own rights in their country.
And legally,
that's why they
are not allowed to endorse regime change or any violence. But again, you are in Russia. You are in Venezuela. You are in certain countries where the government is seen as tyrannical and going against the wishes of the people. So it's fine to endorse it in other countries, but obviously over here, we cannot endorse you do anything violent at all. And also, we don't recommend you go to any of these protests if they start up again, because the state is looking for an excuse to imprison you, even if you do nothing wrong. The things that I will quickly end on as well, so I don't run over time. Do you remember this little thing that I had an exchange with a former Labour MP?
This guy.
The English don't exist. Well, this line has been taken forward by other Labour advisors, and I referenced that Blair wouldn't do this, and that Starmer is the anti-Blair. But Blair's advisors, who still seem to be on Starmer's side, because they're being called upon on slightly hostile outlets to run to his defence, are trotting out the same line that Britain is an ideological nation, that there is no ethnic English identity, and that the far right must either be done away with or re-educated to assimilate. They're trotting that out and thinking it makes them look good. So this is a promise that in future there'll be more criminals let out of prisons to imprison regime dissidents, and that Starmer will continue to do this dividing line of friend and enemy between Englishmen who don't like mass immigration and community groups like Notting Hill Carnival, the Muslim machete vigilantes, who can do no wrong. I'll finish on this clip just because you won't believe what actually gets said in there.
John, please. So, John, what you're doing, John, here is that you're trying to take the actions of a couple of contemptible people who deserve to be in the jail as symptomatic of everybody who expressed a concern about those riots. And you wouldn't do that about the 2011 riots. You wouldn't say that the worst perpetrators there represented everybody who was frustrated about the lack of social cohesion, would you? So why are you doing it now?
No, I'm saying there's a really straightforward lesson to be learned from the racist riots, and that is we have a huge issue in Britain.
You keep calling them racist riots.
Well, that's because they were racist riots.
Everybody who took part was a racist.
We have a huge issue in Britain. Let's say we have a huge issue in Britain because there's a minority of people who refuse to integrate with British society. They refuse to accept the norms of British society. They refuse to accept that we are a multi-faith, multi-ethnic society, and those white racist rioters deserve to be met with the full force of the law.
John McDermott, do you think that people who come into the United Kingdom and refuse to integrate in terms of speaking the language, or they live in silos aside from wider society and they don't integrate, are they also a problem, or is it just the white people looking in who think that could be an issue? I mean, does this go every way, or is it just white people that are a problem?
I'm telling you, the integration problem is these white people who refuse to accept that we are a multi-ethnic, multi-faith society. These white people who decide to show us what they think of our country, of our norms, by attacking police in riots, who show us what they think by burning down a citizen advice bureau. They've shown us what they think by trying to burn people alive because they're white or because they're brown. These are the people who don't integrate, and they need to first be dealt with, and then they need to be taught a way to integrate into the norms of 21st century UK.
So basically, if you don't like how we've destroyed your country with a revolution that has redefined your ethnicity out of existence and told you that your religion is totally backwards while we allow indigestible foreign diasporas and really illiberal Muslims into the country and give them special privileges, you're a far-right racist and you need to go to a bloody re-education camp, according to John McTernan. Do remember that name, by the way, John McTernan, former Labour advisor. I think if he does have a Twitter account, you should tell him exactly what you think of his views here.
Very cute switching around the integration line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, he thinks anybody's going to buy that.
Yeah, well,
anybody that isn't a member of, the Labour client group.
Yeah, a revolutionary reconstitution of British identity is underway. Reject it. This is absurd. They just hate you. They hate you because you're English. You should not feel compelled to apologise for the fact that you oppose mass immigration and that you have an indigestible national identity that you cling to because you love. And just note that if anyone is still in the Labour heartlands voting Starmer thinking that he doesn't have dripping contempt for you, you might be a bit misguided.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast to the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're putting out, here we have a roundtable on the riots in England, and this is a premium video for subscribers, and if you are interested in supporting us other than subscribing, you can also donate. And if you want to see all the work we're putting out, we also post links to that on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.